Tonight, the Middle East has crossed a line many analysts only warned about on paper. Within just a few days, Iran, Israel, and the United States have traded hundreds of missiles and drones, hitting military bases, oil facilities, and even major cities across the region. Analysts warn that up to 15 million barrels of Gulf oil exports per day are now at risk, a disruption that could drive global prices well above $100 a barrel if it escalates. So what exactly is happening? How did we get here? And what does this mean for the future of the global economy and security? Stay with me for the full breakdown. Over the past week, the United States and Israel have carried out a massive wave of coordinated air and missile strikes on Iran, targeting missile launchers, drone factories, and key military infrastructure across multiple provinces. Western security sources say that in just the first major operation, almost 900 strikes hit Iran within about 12 hours, focusing on ballistic missile systems and defense networks. Satellite imagery and military briefings suggest that hundreds of Iranian missile launchers and related facilities have been damaged or destroyed, significantly degrading Tehran's ability to fire large barrages at short notice. Iran, however, has not stayed quiet. In response, Tehran launched waves of ballistic missiles and drones toward Israel and at US military bases spread across Qatar, Bahrain, the Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Some of these projectiles targeted military infrastructure, while others struck or threatened energy and civilian sites, including oil depots and critical infrastructure in Israel and several Gulf states. According to regional reporting, Iran has also hit or threatened shipping around the Strait of Hormuz, briefly forcing closures and disrupting normal flows of oil and gas. The result inside Israel and across parts of the Gulf has been a mix of intercepted missiles, direct impacts, and widespread fear. Israel's layered air defense, backed heavily by US systems, has managed to shoot down many incoming threats, but not all. Damage assessments from international outlets show military sites, industrial zones, and some civilian areas affected, including previous hits on marketplaces and historic locations during this broader conflict cycle. Claims that shelters were all destroyed or that half of all US defenses have totally failed are not supported by any credible public data. What we do know is that a minority of missiles are still getting through, enough to cause casualties and infrastructure damage. One of the most politically sensitive developments has been the naming of a new supreme leader in Iran during this crisis, following earlier leadership transitions and high-profile assassinations and attacks in recent years. Iranian state media have portrayed the new leadership as determined to resist US and Israeli pressure and to respond forcefully to any strikes on Iranian soil or its partners. However, dramatic personal backstories circulating on social media, such as every close family member of the leader being killed, cannot be independently verified and should be treated as narrative framing rather than established fact. The conflict has also pulled in the Gulf states, especially Qatar. Iran's missile launches toward US interests in the region led to explosions and debris in and around Qatar, prompting Doha to accuse Tehran of violating its sovereignty and putting civilians at risk. Qatar's prime minister, who is also the foreign minister, publicly condemned the strikes as a flagrant violation of international law, while stressing that Doha does not want to be dragged into a war that is not its own. At the same time, Qatar has tried to maintain its role as a mediator between Iran and the United States, keeping communication channels open even while criticizing the attacks. Across the wider region, US allies feel trapped. Gulf governments face intense pressure from Washington to help contain Iran and protect shipping routes. But they also fear becoming direct targets if they openly join any offensive campaign. Several have signaled that while they will defend their own territory, they do not want to participate in further escalation or in attacks on Iranian soil. This is a major shift from earlier conflicts, where some Gulf states were more willing to back US operations directly or quietly. Meanwhile, inside the United States, the political and economic stakes are rising fast. The Biden and then Trump administrations already faced pressure over inflation and energy prices in previous years. And now another spike driven by Middle East conflict is seen as unbearable by many economists. Think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations warn that major disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz could unleash a wave of inflation, slow growth, and new financial stress worldwide. Even lawmakers who support a tough line on Iran are quietly warning that a prolonged war would be politically costly at home, especially if fuel, food, and shipping prices soar again. So what does all of this actually mean beyond the headlines and dramatic clips? First, this is not a one-off exchange. It is part of a longer chain of escalations since at least 2023, including previous Iran-Israel missile clashes and the June 2025 12-day war. Each round has pushed the limits a bit further: more targets, deeper strikes, and more open involvement of US forces on one side and Iranian regional proxies on the Other. The current phase stands out because it directly links attacks on Iranian territory to counterstrikes that threaten global energy flows on a scale we have not seen in years. Second, the economic shock is not limited to the region. The Gulf sends around 15 million barrels per day of crude and refined products through routes now considered vulnerable, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. Analysts say that if the strait remains partially or fully disrupted, oil prices could jump well above $100 per barrel, pulling up transport costs, electricity prices, and food prices worldwide that would hit developing economies especially hard, from South Asia to sub-Saharan Africa, where governments have limited room to subsidize energy or absorb another inflation wave. To understand the scale, compare this to how Spain or Indonesia would be affected. Spain, heavily dependent on imported energy, already felt significant pressure during past price spikes linked to the Ukraine war. Another Middle East-driven surge could raise household energy bills and strain European budgets again. Indonesia, a major emerging economy with large fuel subsidies, would face tough choices between letting domestic prices rise or burning through public funds to shield consumers, both of which hurt growth and jobs. In both cases, higher oil and gas prices can slow recovery, weaken currencies, and increase public anger toward political leaders, exactly the kind of instability markets hate. There is also the digital and financial angle that often gets less attention. Many of the world's biggest data centers, cloud hubs, and logistics routes depend on stable energy and predictable shipping through the Gulf and surrounding waters. Analysts note that prolonged instability in the region could raise costs for running large-scale artificial intelligence infrastructure and cloud services as energy and hardware logistics become more expensive and risky. For a Gen Z world that lives on streaming, gaming, and AI, a war in the Gulf doesn't just show up at the fuel pump. It can also hit subscription prices, device costs, and job markets in tech and logistics. Militarily, Iran's capabilities are also under the microscope. Before this latest crisis, Israeli officials estimated that Iran could potentially build up to 8,000 ballistic missiles by 2027 if its programs continued unchecked. At the same time, US and Israeli strikes claim to have disabled or destroyed hundreds of launch platforms in recent weeks, and monitoring groups report that the pace of Iranian launches has slowed compared with the initial days. This suggests that while Iran can still project power across the region, its ability to sustain large-scale barrages over a long period is under serious pressure. Diplomatically, the region is in a kind of cold panic. Qatar, Oman, and other players are trying to mediate, offering back-channel talks between Washington and Tehran to prevent a slide into full-scale regional war. European leaders, including France's President Emmanuel Macron, have reportedly reached out to Iran's president to urge restraint, particularly regarding attacks on Gulf countries and critical energy infrastructure. But so far, every attempted de-escalation has had to work against a powerful momentum of revenge, domestic politics, and military logic on all sides. Looking ahead, there are a few realistic scenarios. One, the managed escalation scenario. The U.S. and Israel keep hitting Iran's missile infrastructure. Iran keeps retaliating at a reduced pace, and back-channel diplomacy slowly freezes the conflict without a formal peace deal. Two, the energy shock scenario. A miscalculation leads to a direct hit on major oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, the UAE or Qatar, or a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz, sending prices soaring and tipping several economies toward recession. 3. The unexpected breakthrough. A mix of battlefield exhaustion, economic pain, and public pressure pushes all sides to accept a limited ceasefire, perhaps brokered by Qatar, Oman, or a European coalition. For now, the most likely path is somewhere between the first two. The United States knows that an open-ended war with Iran would be politically explosive at home, but it also does not want to appear weak or abandon Israel. Iran, meanwhile, wants to show it can hurt US interests and regional rivals without triggering a direct invasion or a domestic backlash it cannot control. That balance pain without collapse is exactly what makes this moment so dangerous for the world economy. If you've made it this far, you already understand this is about more than just Middle East headlines. It's about whether your cost of living, your job prospects, and even your digital life get dragged into a war you've never voted on. So here's the call to action. Stay informed, don't fall for unverified clips or exaggerated claims, and pay attention to how your own leaders talk about war, energy, and peace. If you want more deep dive, fact-checked explainers on global conflicts and the world economy, hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and share this video with someone who still thinks this war won't affect them.